The mid-2000s were a time of rapid evolution in gaming, with developers pushing the boundaries of technology and storytelling. In 2006, Prey emerged as a bold and ambitious title that blended mind-bending mechanics with a deeply personal narrative, taking players on a journey unlike anything they have ever seen before. Developed by Human Head Studios, Prey followed Tommy, a Cherokee man thrust into a desperate battle for survival aboard an alien spaceship. With its innovative use of gravity-defying gameplay, portals, and spiritual abilities, Prey challenged players to think beyond traditional first-person shooter conventions. It was a game that stood out for its immersive world and its exploration of identity and culture amidst the chaos of an alien abduction. Today, we're diving into the story of Prey, its development journey, and its place in the legacy of innovative first-person shooting games. So grab your wrench, brace for zero gravity, and join us for today's extraterrestrial trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 254th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're stepping into Prey, the long-awaited sci-fi shooter that amazed players with its gravity-defying mechanics, Native American themes, and a unique approach to first-person storytelling. After years in development limbo, it finally arrived and is known as one of the more innovative titles of its time. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably get dizzy trying to walk on the walls. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you'd survive this sphere, or will the portals just turn you into space debris?
Space debris, baby!
Yeah, I'd be space debris too. I have no faith in my ability to improvise when up is down, down is up, so on and so forth. None whatsoever.
That's just a normal day, but the thought of being space debris sounds kind of fun. Floating in through the vastness, and then someday the future humans will find me.
Facts. Very, very facts. You know any of the Prey titles?
I feel like I may have played Prey once back long time ago, but, I'm going to say no just because I'm not 100% certain of that, and I don't want to be wrong.
Well, there's two of them, and they're both named Prey, so...
Well, that's not confusing.
No, not confusing at all. We're going to kind of talk about it. All right, well, before we get into that confusing story, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during this current week in gaming history?
Sure thing. On July 13th, 1987, Metal Gear was released for the MSX2, introducing the world to a new kind of action game, one that prioritized stealth over firepower. Developed by Konami and directed by a then unknown Hideo Kojima, the game followed rookie operative Solid Snake as he infiltrated a hostile military base to stop the deployment of Metal Gear, a walking, nuclear-capable tank. Rather than charging headfirst into combat, players had to sneak, evade, and outsmart their enemies, an approach that was groundbreaking at the time. With its innovative mechanics, layered storytelling, and strategic depth, Metal Gear helped define the stealth genre and launch one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history. We explored its origins and Kojima's early vision back in episode 98, so check that out if you want to learn more and maybe hear about our potential special guests that help talk about it.
That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fact. That was a good episode.
It was fun. Our guy was very knowledgeable.
Very, very
If you want to learn more who we're talking about, go find out.
Yes, go find out.
On July 14th, 1992, Mario Paint was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, giving players a creative sandbox unlike anything else on the console. Bundled with the SNES mouse accessory, Mario Paint let users draw pixel art, compose music, animate short cartoons, and even just swat flies in one of gaming's most unexpected minigames. Its simple tools and playful interface made it easy for players of all ages to explore their artistic side, blurring the lines between game and creativity sweet. While it wasn't a traditional Mario title, Mario Paint became a cult favorite, praised for charm, accessibility, and lasting influence on creative game design. We colored its colorful legacy back in episode 49, so if you want to learn more about this imaginative classic, go listen.
Give it a listen. Yay.
Yeah, do the thing.
Do the thing.
On July 10th, 1997, Armored Core launched on the original PlayStation, kicking off what would become one of From Software's most enduring franchises. Set in a dystopian future ruled by powerful corporations, the game put players in the cockpit of fully customizable mechs known as Armored Cores, hence the name. Where they took on mercenary missions across war-torn battlefields. With its deep part swapping customization system, mission based structure, and intense third person combat, Armored Core stood out for its strategic depth and demanding gameplay. It quickly built a dedicated fanbase and laid the groundwork for a long running series that helped establish From Software's reputation well before the Souls games came to define them. We covered the origins and legacy of Armored Core back in episode 202, so if you want to take a deeper dive into the iconic mech series, you know what to do.
Go back and listen to it.
Thank you, Dave.
Just making sure they knew.
Very good idea.
Okay.
Next up, on July 12th, 2004, Bethesda Softworks licensed the rights to the Fallout franchise from Interplay Entertainment, setting the stage for a dramatic reinvention of the beloved post-apocalyptic RPG series. Known for the success of their Elder Scrolls games, Bethesda planned to bring their signature open-world design to the Wasteland. The original Fallout and Fallout 2 had earned a cult following for their dark humor, branching narratives, and gritty turn-based gameplay, but by the early 2000s, the series had stalled. Bethesda's acquisition breathed new life into the franchise, and the announcement of Fallout 3 sparked major anticipation. When the game finally launched in 2008, it delivered a fully 3D first-person experience that preserved the spirit of the original while introducing the series to an entirely new generation. The move proved to be a turning point, solidifying Fallout as one of the biggest names in RPGs and reshaping the series for years to come.
And a good series it reshaped.
Indeed, I agree. And, I feel like we've maybe discussed Fallout before. The original.
Yeah,
so if you're interested in learning about the origins of Fallout, Dave forgot to tell me the episode number, so go figure it out. And last up for this week in gaming history, on July 10th, 2008, Persona 4 was released for the PS2 in Japan, continuing Atlus's cult favorite RPG series with a bold new mystery and a deeper dive into small-town life. Set in the rural town of Inaba, Persona 4 followed a group of high school students who discovered a supernatural world inside their TVs, where they confront shadowy versions of themselves while trying to solve a string of bizarre murders. Building on the social sim mechanics introduced in Persona 3, the game blended dungeon crawling combat with day-to-day activities like building friendships, joining clubs, and studying for exams. It was praised for its memorable characters, emotional storytelling, and clever balance between everyday life and supernatural intrigue. Persona 4 became a breakout hit that cemented the series' global popularity and spawned multiple spin-offs, an anime adaptation, and a remastered version that brought the game to new audiences years later. And we did talk about the precursor to the Persona series, Shin Megami Tensei. So yeah, go do the thing. Also don't know that episode, so figure it out.
Yes.
But with that, I think that we're ready to talk about today's topic. So Dave, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Now, we've recently covered this in our Duke Nukem Forever episode, but here we are, again, looking at mismanagement in the studio known as 3D Realms. So, and every time we're here, let's briefly look to the beginning and talk about where the studio was when this all began. So in case you don't know, Apogee Software was started in 1987 by Scott Miller in order to sell video games using what was later called the Apogee method. And we know this method as the modern day shareware method, by which a developer releases the first chapter in a game, kind of now called a demo, and then asks players to pay for the rest of the game. And through this method, Apogee became one of the premier publishers during the early 1990s, publishing many well-known series, including id Software's Commander Keen series and Apogee's own Duke Nukem series that we recently covered. In 1994, Apogee decided that they would start publishing under different brand names for different genres of games. 3D Realms was created to support what else but Apogee's up-and-coming 3D titles. Right off the bat, the team envisioned becoming the cutting edge of technology at a time in which 3D graphics were progressing incredibly fast. We've talked about that time and time again. The mid 90s were when 3D accelerators became a thing. We call them graphic cards nowadays. And so graphics cards are dedicated computers in itself that specifically just process the graphics in a computer. And when you have your own computer processing graphics, you can process more graphics. That's the easiest way to put it. And these were just coming out, and video game developers were chomping at the bit to find ways to use them. And then they would get faster, and video game developers would use more. And then video games developers would demand more, so the graphic cards would have to get faster. And they played this cat and mouse game for, I mean, they still do to this day, don't they?
Yeah, I'd say so.
You know? Maybe not as bad as the mid 90s, but we're still playing that cat and mouse game between the graphics cards and the games as much as we ever did.
Yeah, no, I would say so.
And so when our topic today, which is Prey, was first announced in 1995, just after the studio finished a game called Rise of the Triad, it was envisioned as the showcase title that would show off everything that the team was working on. Now, might I also add that 1995 is about the time period that we talked about in the Duke Nukem Forever episode. So when 3D Realms, when Apogee became 3D Realms, Prey and Duke Nukem were among the games that they envisioned the studio that, working on right off the bat. So we're right in the same time period that we were weeks ago, roughly. They decided for their 3D showcase, so to speak, that they were going to make a dark science fiction game. And so they began to concept the game out. Well, the project lead is designing the game. There is a team of programmers that start work on a new 3D engine. Now, Tom Hall is a designer who helped found id Software. There were 4 guys that founded id Software. You know John Carmack, John Romero. Those are the 2 everyone knows. One of the other 2 that's not as well known is Tom Hall. During the development of Doom, Tom Hall disagrees with the Johns on, and not just the Johns, but let's say the rest of the team. He disagrees on where they're going to take Doom. They can't come to an agreement on the design of the game. And so Tom Hall leaves id Software in the middle of development on Doom, and he's hired on to Apogee in 1993. And so here in 1995, he is brought into this project as the project lead. And up until this point, he has a pedigree, right? id Software did a lot of great things in that time period, and that's the pedigree he brings. Throughout 1996, Hall oversees a team that would go through many variations on the groundwork of the game that would become Prey. So going into the year, this team already kind of has a really basic, true 3D texture mapped engine running, right? So they basically have a really rudimentary 3D engine. In March, they add network code to the engine, so things are chugging along. They go into spring and they're decided that, okay, hey, the original engine that we made doesn't use 3D accelerators. It uses software. It's software based, which was the standard back when. But because we see that 3D accelerators are becoming the latest and greatest things, we're going to restart this project with support for true 3D acceleration, for hardware acceleration. So they start doing that in May. And in May, they publish the first high resolution screenshot of the game, Rob, which was in 640 by 480.
Ooh, fancy.
But the team still isn't happy because the lighting isn't right. So shortly thereafter, the decision is made to rebuild the engine to support only graphics cards. So the software side is out, right?
Makes sense. I can see it.
So June, roughly, they scratch the entire project and they rewrite the entire engine to support only hardware graphics cards. And at this time, they also develop a tool, an in-house level editor called the Predator, which is a good name.
Yeah,
It's
especially
it's it's
predator, prey. Yeah,
it's yep, Prey
nice,
editor.
nice, nice play on words.
So middle of summer, June, they're rewriting the entire engine to support hardware acceleration. In August, it's announced that some members of the Prey team, including the project lead Tom Hall, leave the company. They're leaving 3D Realms.
Oof. But what happens after that, Dave?
Well,
It can't be the end.
Paul Shoitima is brought on as project leader. While work on the 3D engine continues, all the design work that the previous team did, aka the story and the design Bible, is completely thrown out. And they start
Oh,
rewriting the entire story. So, about a year into development, they scratch everything that they started on, characters, story, levels, everything on the Bible, and they start from scratch.
it's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out.
It's a bold move. So, fast forward to 1997, we're in April. And in April, the first public demo of Prey is shown to the public at the Computer Games Developer Conference, the CGDC, in April of 97. And it runs so well, Rob, that people walk away from that demo thinking that they just were tricked into basically playing along with a pre rendered video.
Damn, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, honestly, in that time period, absolutely. Absolutely. So, of course, when everyone walks away from the CGDC, it really starts to build the hype around this, right? The excitement for what 3D Realms is doing is they have this going, they got Duke Nukem, and all the time they're talking about the cutting edge technologies they're doing. And there's a lot of excitement for this like new 3D engine that they're building. And so in September of 1997, in an issue of Next Generation magazine, the team at 3D Realms brags, there's a whole feature article about their new 3D graphics engine, which they called Portals. In the magazine's feature on Prey, project leader Paul Shoitima said that Portals takes a new approach to spatial relationships. Other engines like Quake or Unreal, he says, they speed up geometry by pre-rendering all the possible possibilities in a level, right? They think about all the possibilities and they do them ahead of time. And so instead of modeling a structure as a series of solid walls that form rooms or corridors, heck, we still do that to this day, to be honest with you. Just by, I mean, that's how we build levels. They're just walls, right?
Yeah. That's true.
Portals was designed to break up each area into a discrete room, and the portals, quote unquote, are the openings between them, which can be a window, a door, or other opening. So imagine, if you will, that each room is a web page, and that each portal is a link to a new web page. So basically, the game isn't having to write the entire structure at once. It's really only having to write the level that the room that you're in. Now
Okay.
we still do that to this day. Like, we do both actually. We still design the level in corridors like we did the old one, but we only render what's in the view of the camera nowadays to improve performance when we can. So we kind of one of the most common methods is really a hybrid of those two ideas, but they were both cutting edge at the time, right?
Right.
So Shoitima goes on to explain that he's aware of other developers utilizing similar methods, but the key difference in 3D Realms engine is the actual placement of portals. While other developers' portals, so to speak, were tied to the edges of environments, literally the doors, the windows, are a hole in the wall that we said. The programming team at 3D Realms by that point had figured out how to make portals freestanding on their own. So they were literally portals the way I think we're going to think of portals as a modern gaming audience thinks to the game Portal, to be honest.
Yeah,
So,
that was honestly my first thought when you said portals.
right. And so essentially, they could place an entrance for a level anywhere. They could link room geographies on the fly, so to speak. They weren't limited to a door. They could put a hole in the floor. They could literally put a portal in the middle of a level. And so they were excited by the prospect of being able to do this anywhere, and how you could potentially link two unrelated rooms together using this method. Because in the corridor way, it's a little bit harder because you have to connect them with a corridor, I guess is the way to put it. It's a little harder to do that kind of stuff. At the same time, word is getting out there that there are members of the Prey team who are putting it out into the world that the Predator editor, the
That
Predator,
seems redundant.
the Predator has become the most advanced level editor ever created. What's special about it is it directly uses the engine. It is an in-engine level editor. And so level designers can actually see their work in real time as they create and edit it, which is not something any of the other engines were doing at the time.
Hmm.
And
I
now
yeah,
now we do that. It's more common nowadays. We do it that way. Of course, computers are a gajillion times faster. So
that's fair point. But I guess I never really considered that wasn't a thing outside of when you had to program everything with lines of code, like the old days.
lines
But
of code, or you had to design it in one program and then it had to literally be rendered and processed into the actual other program, which is. So word gets out, right? We have the game developers conference where everyone's like, holy crap, this looks like, I don't even believe that this was a 3D demo. This is a pre-rendered video. uh, you have these magazine articles, you have word coming out that the Predator is awesome because it lets you edit in real time. And so other game development studios started to notice what 3D Realms was doing. And so they began to reach out to 3D Realms in order to license the Portals engine, which admittedly 3D Realms wasn't at the time. What they did let these companies do is sign NDAs that allowed them to see what was happening and gain future access to the engine once it's completed. So 1997, later fall into winter, work continues on the 3D engine. The design team separately finalizes the design of Chapter 1. They basically announced to the world in December of 1997, Chapter 1 is done, and we have a rough framework of what the rest of the game is going to look like. So, with that being said, work continues into 1998. In the early summer of 98, one of the other studio heads that we've heard about before recently, George Broussard, the project lead of Duke Nukem Forever, announces that work is progressing nicely on the engine, which he calls in this article, our press release, Prey Tech. And that Prey Tech is going to be utilized on Prey and the next game in the Duke Nukem series, which was Duke Nukem 5, because they had something else going on for Duke Nukem Forever that we know about. So they were already planning beyond that, not knowing that Duke Nukem Forever was going to take 14 years. And they're like, hey, we're wrapping up Duke Nukem Forever, and when we make Duke Nukem 5, Prey Tech is going to be the engine, right?
Well, hey, now they can use Prey Tech for Duke Nukem 5.
That's a true statement. We also learn in the summertime that the entire Prey storyline has been mapped out. It's going to include 7 chapters. So work continues on the game with all this in mind into the fall of 1998. At this point, though, it becomes obvious that the game is being held back by the complexity of the portal concept that the studio framed their whole engine around. And this problem is big enough that it brings development on Prey to a complete and utter halt. Full stop. And in response, 3D Realms says, we're done. We're going to scrap this game in its entirety.
Oh, man.
So at that time, the lead, Shoitama, and others, they leave the company. The rest of the team that was working on the game is moved over to Duke Nukem Forever, which at the time, if you want to tie up the timelines and episodes, it's on its second iteration. And in November of 1998, 3D Realms hires Corinne Yu from Iron Storm. Yu was their director of technology, but what Yu was best known for at this point, she wrote the base code for the Quake 2 engine, which was one of the premier engines at that moment. So, this is the programmer who wrote the current Quake engine. And they poach her from Ion Storm and say, hey, we want you to write a completely new graphical engine all by yourself. So throughout 1999, there is little said about Prey, and rumors therefore start to trickle out that the project is dead, which are strongly denied by the studio. Until we get to March of 2000, in which Yu is fired because, according to the studio, she couldn't write anything that they could use. In August of 2000, in response to continued claims that the project was dead, the studio announces that it's not dead, but it's going to be put on hold until Duke Nukem Forever is finished. And that makes me giggle every time I get to that point. They're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah, definitely.
In October of 2000, a studio called Human Head Studio releases their first game. It's an action adventure title called Rune. It's basically a Viking action adventure title. And it does okay. They're looking for their next project. And while looking for a second project, so to speak, they reach out to 3D Realms and they ask about Prey. The studios kind of hit it off as part of this conversation, and they begin talks for Human Head to develop Prey. In May of 2001, 3D Realms signs an agreement with Human Head and Take-Two, announcing that Human Head would develop the game while Take-Two would take over publishing duties. At this point, George Broussard pulls out Shoitima's documents from 1997. He revises them a little bit, and he hands them off to Human Head to become the basis of what is now the 4th iteration of Prey. We know Prey Tech is dead, right? That was version number 2. U is version number 3, and they got nowhere there, so there's no engine. So the team reaches out to id, and at the time you have id Tech, the Doom 3 engine. and they decide that they're going to use a Doom 3 engine. So they sign a licensing agreement on the engine, and they begin development work on the human head version of Prey roughly by the end of 2001. And for years, little scraps of the game related to its development find their way into the public, but the human head version of the game, isn't officially announced until April 26, 2005. We're 10 years into this at this point.
I mean, still not the worst we've heard.
No, 3D Realms is notorious for this. And for the next year, the process was pretty normal. Prey gets shown at E3, ends up being reported on like any other upcoming title during that time period, and finally releases to the public on July 11th, 2006, which is roughly 11 years after its initial announcement. Crazy. Crazy. 11 years, Rob.
That's definitely a long time.
You know, Rob, with everything we've covered so far, from custom engines and canceled versions to staff changes and complete overhauls, it's honestly amazing that Prey ever came out at all.
Yeah, 11 years and 4 different versions? That's not development. It's more like a saga.
Amen.
You almost need a conspiracy board to track the timeline, red yarn and all.
Exactly. And if you got a story you want to tell, hopefully with fewer rewrites and missed deadlines, podcasting is a great way to do it. And with Zencaster, getting your story out there is easier than ever.
All right, I'm ready. Give me the pitch. What makes Zencaster the go-to platform?
Well, Zencaster lets you record high quality audio and video right from your web browser. No fancy setups, no expensive gear. Just log in and hit record. It's perfect whether you're launching your first show or evolving your 11th draft of one.
So, less like Prey's original in-house engine and more like picking the Doom 3 engine. Solid, reliable, and it actually works?
Exactly. And after recording, Zencaster's built in post production tools clean up your audio, balance your levels, and even remove filler words. It's like your own behind the scenes dev team keeping your show polished.
And I assume once the masterpiece is done, it's easy to ship it out to the world?
Super easy. You can publish directly to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else without leaving Zencaster's dashboard.
Okay, you've sold me. How can our listeners get started?
Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether your podcast takes 11 years or 11 days, Zencaster helps you tell your story right.
So, listeners, if you've got a wild development story of your own, or just a great idea, Zencaster is your ticket to getting it out there.
Exactly. Now let's get back to Prey. All right, so by the time Prey came out in July of 2006, it wasn't at the cutting edge of technology like 3D Realms had originally hoped. But what it was praised for was a game with top notch graphics and gameplay that was designed as everything anyone would want from a sci fi shooter. Sounds good, huh?
I would say so.
I would say so too. I would definitely say so. um, for those of you that have never played Prey before, it is like I said, first person shooter that is focused around a Cherokee, Tommy, and his girlfriend and his grandfather are abducted aboard an alien spaceship known as the Sphere. The Sphere kind of consumes material, living and non living, from Earth in order to sustain itself. And basically, Tommy's Cherokee heritage lets his spirit roam freely at times and come back to life after dying. And these are traits that Tommy uses as an edge to battle against the Sphere. And so portals are kind of like the way that they kind of they use them in different ways. One is obviously portals, but another is like being able to detach from your body. Your spirit can detach from your body and roam freely for a short period of time, and you can use it to like activate control panels. And there's a spirit bow that will attack enemies. So there's all these fun ways that they use that style. So it's a super cool. It was very unique. That's a really neat game mechanic that really wasn't around anywhere else in 2006, you know?
Right.
So, really fantastic, really a lot of fun. People loved it. It currently sits at an 83 on Metacritic. It sold decently too. By October, it comes out in July. By October, they had sold over 1 million copies between all of its platforms, which are if I remember correctly, Windows, Xbox 360, probably got a Mac and a Linux, but I'm pretty sure it was only a PC and Xbox 360 bases. Um, and so shortly after the game's release, because it was received well and sold well, 3D Realms announces that they're going to start development on Prey 2. No surprise, right?
No, I don't believe that it is.
So March 17th, 2008, Scott Miller, the founder of Apogee, announces that he's going to launch the Radar Group, which is they advertise themselves as a brand management firm that basically, as it's described, they're going to help independent studios develop original properties in video games and film. So the notion was that Radar Group wasn't going to touch any licensed properties whatsoever, just original IPs, and they would help support the studios as like a consulting firm as they developed video games and expanded it out to film. They did try to bring Prey to film at one point through this process. By the way, it didn't get anywhere, so we're not going to talk about it much beyond that. At the time of the announcement that the Radar Group was launching, they noted in the press release that there were 3 titles that the group was initially managing. And for the purpose of our topic today, one of them was Prey 2, which they announced was still being developed by Human Head Studios, right? So a year later, in June of 2009, 3D Realms transfers ownership of the Prey IP over to the Radar Group. Okay.
Okay.
At the end of August, a month later, the radar, at the end of August, a month later, the Radar Group sells the IP to ZeniMax, which is the parent company of Bethesda. So now the game is being overseen by Bethesda Softworks, right? Bethesda's famous for the Elder Scrolls, for instance. In March of 2011, Bethesda announces Prey 2 with an official 2012 release. But as the team rather, moves through the rest of 2011, it becomes clear that this just isn't going to happen. Bethesda starts pushing for milestones to be achieved, and they actually do threaten to withhold payment when they're not met. In November, they actually make an offer to buy Human Head Studios outright, but Human Head refuses the offer and they stop work on Prey 2 as a form of protest. So in 2012, the rumor mills, as a result, start churning out the fact that Prey 2 is canceled. And in time, all this evidence starts to pile up, confirming that fact. For instance, in August of 2012, Bethesda removes Prey 2 from their website. What else are people going to think?
Yeah, it definitely sounds like something people would go to with that.
And then we hear nothing. Absolutely nothing.
And that doesn't help.
Until May of 2013, when Kotaku publishes a story that Arkane Studios is developing Prey, but gets no confirmation otherwise. Arkane, of course, popular for the Dishonored series. In October 2014, a year later, Bethesda finally announces that Prey has been canceled.
Nice. Well, the
That
rumors were true.
the rumors were true. A few years later, at E3 2016, it announces that a new game, Prey, is being developed by Arkane Studios. So Arkane had developed a relationship with Bethesda after Bethesda approached them to work on the idea for a stealth game that is set in feudal Japan. That idea evolved into Dishonored. And that relationship was so great that during the development of Dishonored, Bethesda bought Arkane Studios outright, meaning that Arkane was now one of the other ZeniMax development studios. After Dishonored, Arkane decides to split up their team to work on two separate projects. Okay. The,
Okay.
fir- the first one is Dishonored 2. The second one was slated to be an original property that they had an idea for that involved a space station full of aliens that, as they put it, would require the player to consider the full ecology of the game world to overcome obstacles. And as they began to expand this concept, they recognized its similarities to the original Prey. So they reached out to Bethesda and they made arrangements to turn their concept into what we call an inventive reimagining of the Prey series. A reboot, if you will. A reboot of Prey. Yeah?
Yeah, quite.
You think maybe that's the one that you know of? The
Uh
2017 one?
I'm trying to think of when I would have played it. I don't remember it being around when I was graduating, so I don't believe so. But maybe I just heard about it. And like I said, I can't really remember for certain if I played it, so I'm not 100% positive, but I think it was actually the original.
So, according to design documents that were published early in this project's history, this version of Prey was developed at Arkane initially under the name Project Danielle. And Project Danielle was an homage to Shodan of System Shock. We've done a System Shock episode before. Shodan is one of the best villains in video game history, probably. Not probably is. And when they were trying to plan out the story of this, they kept going back to like the nature of System Shock, um, and kind of how it presents a false reality in their world, and it deals with an artificial intelligence, Shodan, that has this like significant influence on events, right? The setting of System Shock, futuristic lab, secret lab, retrofuturistic setting, these are all things that they wanted to play with here. So they're incorporating System Shock, they're incorporating Looking Glass Studios Thief, which we did a whole episode on. They What they take from both games is they want to build a game that encourages players to find creative solutions to overcome obstacles. And like I said, the first Prey, you had the spirit walking, and the portals, so that spiritually was the same concept, which is how they put it all together, right?
Right.
Dishonored, very stealthy game. Thief, very stealthy game. System Shock, different ways of playing it. From the System Shock episode, you've learned that that was one of the first person shooters that incorporated RPG elements. So they kind of wanted that. They wanted less of the stealth as much as they took the influence. They wanted to lean a little bit more towards a role playing game style improvement system in the same respect of System Shock. And they kind of saw Prey as almost a, people call it a Metroidvania, because you have to make progress to gain more traits, to overcome obstacles during the game. And while it's not as quite back and forth, back and forth, back and forth that an actual Metroidvania is, the concept is the same thing, right?
Right.
So they're basically like taking all these bits and pieces from everywhere, and they make this great game where you can either play the game in full action mode or you can play it in full stealth mode. There are different specific skills and weapons that you could use depending on either one. And they just, like I said, they just took all these bits and pieces from all these different places and they put them together. This Prey takes place in a parallel universe, Rob, and one of my favorite things is this parallel universe diverges from John F. Kennedy's assassination, and in this universe, he does not get assassinated.
Wow. That's definitely interesting.
That's kind of where they started. They thought about a retrofuturistic future that would have been different if Kennedy had survived the assassination attempt, and so this kind of allowed them to, off of that, build a narrative of a space station at that time period in that retrofuturistic and what the world would be like if Kennedy had not been assassinated, which is really fascinating. So they reimagined Prey. It's a reboot of the series, according to Bethesda. Took inspiration from many places, their own Dishonored series and System Shock and Thief, put all together, and released Arkane's version of Prey on May 5th, 2017. So if you look them up, you have Prey in parentheses 2006 and Prey in parentheses 2017. Prey 2017 was also well received by critics. It sits at an 82. I think the first one was an 83, so they're pretty equal in that respect. But with that being said, it did not sell as well as the first one. Different time period, different expectations, all that jazz. And so Prey 2017 did not really meet Bethesda's expectations in terms of sales. So there really hasn't been any talk of continuing the series from Bethesda themselves. With that being said, that doesn't mean that hasn't happened. In 2019, Scott Miller, founder of Apogee and now 3D Realms, gets the idea that all the work that Human Head Studios did on Prey 2 could be released. So he begins to work a deal with Human Head and Bethesda to do just that. Their thought process is that they're going to wrap up all the work that they had already done on Prey 2 and release it as kind of a spiritual sequel to both games, I guess. Human Head is on board. They are, yay. Then in November of 2019, Bethesda finally buys the studio out, Human Head, and they reopen the studio as Roundhouse Studios, and that effectively kills any deal that was on the books to re-release Prey 2. And we know, of course, a year later, in November of 2020, exactly a year later, that Microsoft then goes and completes one of the biggest purchases in gaming ever before Activision Blizzard. At the time, they bought ZeniMax, and it included Bethesda, and that was a huge, huge purchase for Microsoft, right?
I would say so, yeah.
And so when they did that, they also bought the Prey intellectual property. So Microsoft now owns it, and they too have made no announcements indicating any interest in reviving the series. Wah, wah.
Wah, 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 indeed, Dave.
So that's the story of Prey. Yet another, I would say, troubled development that was started by 3D Realms. They don't. Well, it's funny because while Apogee has a stellar track record, 3D Realms has anything but, right?
Yeah, it does seem to be that way.
It's like the height, their specialty, their apex was 2D platformers, because when the company tried to transition into 3D, every 3D project, not every, but the big ones, the ones people really wanted, were all kind of failures in a lot of respects. So And of course, I'm talking about this one and Duke Nukem Forever. And we just did our episode on Duke Nukem Forever. It has been, I don't know, a month, maybe? I don't know. I'm not going to go look it up, but it's been very recently. So if you'd like to learn about all the problems that that project had to find out what I'm talking about, you can go check out that episode. It's in our archives. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but also on our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics to see what we will be talking about in coming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics or gaming topics or anything else. You can find links to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob underscore O underscore Raptor. And Dave?
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you one story relevant to current week in gaming history. This week, of course, Prey. We covered both Preys. And when we sit down each week to research and write out the outline for a new episode, we look for new things. That's my favorite part. I sit down, look at a story, I find something I didn't know, and I get excited because then I can teach it to an audience that probably doesn't know either. It's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in recognition of that, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think that my takeaway is, following the original 2006 version, the four different reiterations of them during development, changing the engine and the design path with the graphics card hardware acceleration. Um, it's a lot, and it's kind of interesting that they were able to continue with it and didn't give up and were able to actually publish the game. So, that's one of those things that we talk about pretty often, that the perseverance of the development teams is admirational. And this is, again, no different in that regard. Took some time, took a lot of work, a lot of different changes, but the team was able to pull it together despite all of the hardships and make it happen.
True statement.
So, what about yourself? What's your big takeaway?
I never really realized that this came out of that time period when 3D Realms was getting started and they wanted to be the company that was on the cutting edge of 3D graphics, right?
Hmm.
Uh, this was going to be their cutting edge 3D engine. And on the Duke Nukem side, they were spending, I don't know if you remember, $500,000 was the first engine they bought, right?
Right.
Um, was the Quake engine or Unreal engine at the time. They were trying to develop their own engine while spending a lot of money on other cutting edge engines to try to show themselves off as a company on the cutting edge technology. But at the same time, they were mismanaging these projects, and none of them ever really amounted to anything. So I think that's very fascinating, and I didn't really realize that this came out of that same mess, literally. So that's my takeaway.
Well, another good one, and definitely something to learn about. And you don't know, you don't know, and now you know.
The expansion, also side note, for 2017 Prey called Moon Crash is a procedurally generated adventure that has roguelike elements. So it's compared to like Risk of Rain and Dead Cells that we played. Well, Risk of Rain, at least. So if you ever get if you do trip on the 2017 Prey, get the expansion. It's really great. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Rob, before I take it out of here and into next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take one quick moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. It means the world to have you along as we take deep dives into some of our favorite gaming topics and proceed to learn about them. So we hope you enjoy. We hope you continue to listen. And thank you for your support.
Awesome. As we leave the gravity defying corridors of Prey, we're reminded of how its innovative mechanics and deeply personal narrative pushed the boundaries of first person shooting design at the time. For the first Prey, Human Head Studios delivered an unforgettable journey that honestly still resonates with people. So whether you're wielding its spiritual powers or just exploring its alien landscapes, always remember that power that storytelling has in gaming. Next week, though, we're leaving behind the zero gravity chaos of Prey to journey to a galaxy far, far away with finally Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Woo!
Released in 2003, this groundbreaking RPG lets players shape their destiny as a Jedi or Sith, weaving moral choices with deep character development and a sprawling narrative. From its unforgettable characters to its innovative design, KOTOR set a new standard for RPGs and storytelling in gaming. Join us as we explore the legacy of this iconic title on next week's force-filled trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibidi dap 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 do up bow wow.